I walked across the creaky floorboards of my childhood home and felt the weight of the manila envelope in my hands. I sat down at the heavy oak dining table and stared at the dust motes dancing in the afternoon sun while my heart hammered against my ribs. I reached out and touched the smooth surface of the paper before finally pulling out the stack of photographs that would change my life forever. I looked at the first image and saw my father smiling in a way he never smiles at home. I stood up and paced the kitchen floor trying to find a reason to doubt what I was seeing. I stopped by the window and watched the birds outside while I gripped the edge of the counter so hard my knuckles turned white. These Reddit stories usually involve small secrets, but my reality was shattering into a million pieces. I poured a glass of cold water and drank it in one go, hoping the chill would snap me out of this nightmare. I sat back down and spread the photos across the table like a deck of cards. My father was at a park only 40 miles away from the house he shares with my mother. He was not at a business conference in Chicago or a meeting in New York. He was pushing a little girl on a swing set, and the joy on his face was a physical blow to my chest. She has my eyes and my exact smile, which made the betrayal feel visceral. A woman stood next to him with her hand on his shoulder, and they looked like the perfect picture of domestic bliss. I spent hours looking at hundreds of photos documenting a life I was never meant to see. My father has a second mortgage and a second set of responsibilities that he has hidden for 15 years. My mother has been married to this man for 3 decades and she worships him. She thinks his long trips are the reason we have our beautiful home and a comfortable life. What would you do in my place? Let me know what you think in the comments and subscribe for more shocking Reddit stories because I am completely lost. The investigator found the truth buried in the bank statements, and it is worse than I could have imagined. My father has been stealing from my mother's retirement fund to pay for this other woman's lifestyle. He is a predator in a custom suit who has perfected the art of the mask. He acts like a saint at the dinner table, while 3 other children are waiting for him to tuck them in at night in another city. I found the other wife's social media and she posts about her hero husband constantly. She has no idea her entire marriage is a legal fiction and a crime. I have the power to burn 2 worlds down today, and I do not know if I have the strength to do it. If I speak the truth, my mother loses her dignity and her entire financial future. If I stay silent, I am just another accomplice in his web of lies. I feel like the walls are closing in on me. The investigator warned me that men who live double lives are dangerous when they are cornered. I am trapped in a house of cards that is ready to collapse. My father came home tonight and gave my mother a beautiful necklace. I know the money for that gift came from a joint account he shares with the other woman. Every gesture he makes is a calculated lie designed to keep the peace. I look at my half-siblings on my phone screen and see my own nose and the same birthmark on their wrist that I have. It is haunting to see your own features on a stranger. I tried to sleep, but I keep seeing the investigator's notes about secret accounts in the Cayman Islands. My father is not just a bigamist, he is a ghost who has moved through the world without leaving a real trail. I looked at the property records one last time this morning and found something that stopped my breath. My mother's actual signature is on the deed for the house where the second family lives. The discovery of my mother's signature on that deed sent me into a spiral of confusion that I cannot describe. I spent the entire morning sitting in my car outside a coffee shop just staring at the digital scan of the document. I searched through old boxes in the attic looking for any evidence of her involvement or any sign that she knew about the other house. I walked through the halls of our home and looked at the family photos on the walls with a sense of profound disgust. I saw my mother in the kitchen preparing dinner, and she looked so fragile and innocent that the idea of her being a co-conspirator felt impossible. I watched her hands as she chopped vegetables and wondered if those same hands had signed away our security. I decided to follow my father when he left for his supposed business trip the next day. I stayed 3 cars behind him on the highway and felt like a character in a movie I never wanted to watch. He drove with such confidence and ease as if he had no care in the world. He stopped at a gas station and I watched him buy a bouquet of flowers and a box of chocolates. I felt a surge of anger that made me want to scream. I tracked him all the way to the suburban neighborhood where the second family lives. The house was a modest blue colonial with a well-kept lawn and a swing set in the backyard. I parked down the street and watched as he pulled into the driveway. The front door opened and the woman from the photos ran out to greet him with a hug that looked entirely genuine. The children followed and they swarmed him like he was their whole world. I sat there in the dark of my car and realized that I was looking at a mirror image of my own childhood. This was not just a fling or a temporary lapse in judgment. This was a fully realized parallel existence that had been running alongside mine for over a decade. I felt like I was disappearing. I went back to the private investigator's office that evening to demand more answers about the signature. He looked at me with pity and told me that the ink was definitely her handwriting. He suggested that my father might have tricked her into signing documents under the guise of refinancing our own home. The stakes were getting higher because if my mother was involved, she could face legal consequences along with him. I started looking into the bank accounts myself and found that money was moving in circles between multiple LLCs. My father was laundering his own income to keep both households running without either woman noticing the drain. The emotional weight of this secret was starting to affect my health. I could not eat or sleep without seeing the faces of those children. I realized that my father had stolen my mother's golden years to build a playground for someone else. I spent the night drafting a letter to my mother, but I kept tearing it up. I was terrified of what the truth would do to her heart. I felt like I was holding a live wire and I didn't know how to let go without getting burned. Every time my father called me to check in, he sounded so normal and fatherly. It made me realize how easy it is for a monster to sound like a man. I was starting to see the cracks in his performance now that I knew what to look for. He was always checking his watch and his stories about work were filled with vague details that didn't add up. I am reaching a breaking point where I have to choose between my loyalty to my mother and my need for justice. I decided to go back to the investigator's office one last time to look at the high-resolution photos he had taken of the second family's backyard. I sat in the dim light of his office and scrolled through the images until I saw something that made the blood drain from my face. In the background of a photo taken during a backyard barbecue, there was an older man sitting in a lawn chair. He was wearing a hat and sunglasses, but the profile was unmistakable. I stood up and leaned into the monitor until my nose was inches from the screen. That man looked exactly like my grandfather who supposedly died 20 years ago. I felt a chill run down my spine that was colder than anything I had ever felt before. I remember the funeral, and I remember the closed casket, but I realized in that moment that I had never actually seen his body. I asked the investigator to zoom in on the man's hands. He was wearing a signet ring with a specific crest that has been in our family for generations. My grandfather was not dead, he was living with my father's second family. The level of deception was so deep it felt like a coordinated conspiracy. I drove back to the property records office and demanded to see the original physical copies of the deeds. I spent hours in the basement of the county building flipping through dusty ledgers until I found the file. I looked at the signature of the witness on the deed for the second house. It was my grandfather's signature dated 5 years after he was supposedly buried. I felt like I was losing my mind in that basement. I realized that my father hadn't just built a second life for himself, he had helped his own father vanish and start over too. I took photos of everything and went straight to the house where the second family lived. I didn't care about the consequences anymore. I pulled into the driveway and walked up to the front door with my heart thumping in my ears. I knocked loudly and waited. The woman opened the door and looked at me with confusion. I pushed past her and walked into the living room where my father was sitting on the sofa. He looked up and the mask finally slipped. His face went pale and he dropped his glass of wine on the carpet. I didn't say a word to him. I looked toward the hallway and saw the older man stepping out of the shadows. It was him. My grandfather was standing right there looking older and more tired but definitely alive. He looked at me with eyes full of regret and whispered my name. I felt like I was standing in a graveyard full of living people. My father stood up and tried to grab my arm but I pulled away. I told him I knew about the bank accounts and the retirement fund and the signature on the deed. He started rambling about how he did it all to protect the family and how my grandfather needed a fresh start after some legal trouble 20 years ago. The woman started crying and asking who I was. I looked her in the eye and told her that I was the son from his real life. The house became a chaotic mess of screaming and accusations. I realized that my mother's signature on the deed was forged by my grandfather who was a master calligrapher. My father had used his own father's skills to steal my mother's identity and her future. The two of them had been running this scam together for decades. It was the most elaborate betrayal I had ever heard of. I took my phone out and started recording everything because I knew I would need evidence for the police. My father tried to take the phone but I pushed him back. I told him that the game was over and that I was going to the authorities the moment I left that house. I walked out of that house and didn't look back even though I could hear my father shouting my name from the porch. I drove straight to the police station and sat in the parking lot for an hour just trying to breathe. The world felt different now that the truth was out in the open. I felt a strange sense of relief mixed with a crushing weight of sadness. I went inside and spoke to a detective for 4 hours showing him every photo and every document I had gathered. They were stunned by the complexity of the bigamy and the identity theft. I had to go home and tell my mother everything, which was the hardest thing I have ever done. I sat her down on the sofa and held her hands while I explained that the man she loved was a stranger. I watched her soul break in real time as she processed the theft of her retirement and the existence of the other family. She didn't scream or cry at first, she just stared at the wall in silence. The police arrested my father and my grandfather the next morning. It turned out my grandfather had faked his death to avoid a massive federal investigation into his own financial crimes, and my father had been his accomplice the entire time. The second family was also destroyed by the news. The other woman had truly believed she was in a happy marriage and she was left with nothing but a house she couldn't afford and a husband in jail. I spent the next few months helping my mother navigate the legal system to try and recover whatever was left of her money. We found out that most of it was gone spent on the other family and my grandfather's hidden lifestyle. Our childhood home had to be sold to cover the legal fees and the debts my father had racked up in my mother's name. I moved her into a small apartment near my place and we are trying to rebuild a life from the ashes. I don't speak to my father or my grandfather even though they send letters from prison begging for forgiveness. They still try to justify what they did by saying they were protecting the family legacy. I realize that some people are just born with a void where their conscience should be. I look at my half-siblings sometimes and I wonder if I should reach out to them. They are innocent victims in all of this just like my mother was. I still have nightmares about that manila envelope and the day my reality shifted. I learned that you never truly know the people you share a dinner table with. My mother is slowly getting stronger, but the sparkle in her eyes is gone, and I don't think it will ever come back. I share this story because I want people to know that the monsters aren't always strangers in the dark. Sometimes they are the people who tuck you in at night and tell you that they love you more than anything in the world. I am left with a lot of questions about identity and what it means to be a family. I have lost my father and my grandfather, but I have gained a truth that no one can ever take away from me again. I am moving forward one day at a time and trying to find peace in a world that feels much smaller and more dangerous than it did before. The house of cards has fallen, and I am finally standing on solid ground, even if that ground is lonely. Thank you for listening to my story and for being a part of this community where we can share the things that are too heavy to carry alone. I hope my experience serves as a warning to always look closer at the things that seem too perfect to be true.